I suggest that we slowly start. Dear colleagues, good morning. Thanks for attending the second public workshop on the long-term flow-based allocation. I'm Zoran Vujasinovic from ACER, and together with Ignacio Zubieta from ENTSO-E, I would be managing this workshop. And we had a first workshop some months ago on the 27th of January. It was more related to capacity calculation and as being triggered by the recent decision at that point of time of long-term flow-based capacity calculation in the core region. Then we discussed the capacity calculation in core and Nordics, and we opened the subjects related to capacity allocation in a flow-based manner. Today, we would discuss briefly the capacity calculation to see the implementation developments in two regions, core and Nordics, and we would deepen the pending topics on the flow-based capacity allocation and related documents that need to be further refined. So let me first remind on some rules for our workshop here. So active speakers should keep microphone muted when not speaking. Other speakers, when want to comment something or make a question, should raise hand, and then Nina will open the possibility to activate the microphone for them. Slides will be shared, and the meeting has been recorded if this is okay with all of you. Then I would just briefly pass through the agenda, and then afterwards I would hand over to Andre from 50 Hertz and ENTSO-E for ENTSO-E's introduction. So after this introduction, the first session is related to capacity calculation and Nordic and core TSO's planning on implementation and implementation. In the core part, we would expect also the feedback from market participants on external parallel run and key performance indicators. There is no dedicated presentation on that from market participants, as far as I know, but we hope for at least an oral feedback and proposals. In the second session, we would discuss the allocation. It would be the main part of the workshop, and ENTSO-E would provide the general update on the process and allocation methodologies. And after the discussion in this respect, we would expect the alternative proposal for the optimization function from IFET and Eurelectric. Then there are TSOs and ACER's reflections on market participants' concerns and this alternative proposal. And then the rest of the time is dedicated to discussion and wrap up. The meeting is scheduled for until 1 o'clock. We are flexible. These times are provisional, and we can also make a coffee break in a proper moment. Okay, that would be it from my side so far. I would now hand over to Andre to say a couple of words in front of ENTSO-E.
Yes, thank you very much, Zoran. Thank you very much, ACER. And again, thank you very much for all the people in the call. I see so many joining today, which is always a good news that we come together in a forum as such and talk about the advancement of markets and the use of markets. I think what is quite important for today that we need to understand also when we look at the agenda, if we look at the topics ahead of it, that the sheer complexity of this project is something that we need to acknowledge, and also the somewhat of a triangle between the regulatory needs, the market participants need, but also the operational needs in order to make regulatory requirements, but also market party requirements operational and robust, because this is something that we all strive for, that robustness and trust in the markets itself is something, particularly in the times that we're currently in, is something that we need to uphold. So we are very much looking forward for those kinds of forums. We are very much looking forward to continue sessions as such, and also in collaboration with ACER to invite market participants to directly engage with us on the topics that are relevant for them. And here, I must say, I also like that we are shifting away a bit from this introduction of capacity calculation itself, and now going more into the of capacity allocation. And this is basically also what we foresee in future workshops. This is the second one essentially in this forum, and we would also like to have more workshops in this direction in the future, going more and more in the direction of allocation and to see how that can be facilitated within the regulatory sphere, within the respective requirements for market participants, but also the ability of TSOs and later on also the platform, the single allocation platform, to provide this kind of service on a robust manner. So yes, again, let's continue to the discussion. Let's use this here very much to engage and take away the points that we need to work on, and then hopefully we come back together similar time as we did, some sort of like a biannual thing that could be something that we go for. So I'm very pleased that we have this kind of forum, and I'm very happy for the points to raise and also your questions to be tackled today. So yeah, thank you very much and enjoy the workshop.
Thank you, Andre. I would now hand over to the colleagues from Nordic TSOs to briefly present their planning on the implementation on the long-term capacity calculation.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. My name is Stefan Svensson. I work at Svenska Kraftnät with mainly capacity calculation on all time frames, but also in our current project on the supporting of the hedging opportunities in Sweden and Finland. Shall I present the slides, or is someone else presenting the slide?
The slide is here, so I guess that it's from your side to be presented.
Okay.
If you can see the slide, yeah.
Now I see the slide. Okay. Yeah. So here you can see a high-level timeline of the implementation of the capacity calculation in the Nordic capacity calculation region, where we start. Okay, the slide seems to be shifting out. That's just for me. So yeah. Okay. Yeah, and you see the timeline started last year, and we are currently in the start of the day-ahead intraday capacity calculations, external parallel runs in the Nordic capacity calculation, and this is important for the long-term capacity calculation, as the go live of that is 12 months after the go live of the day-ahead intraday capacity calculation. So that is why the timeline is divided as it is. We also plan to have a parallel run of the long-term capacity calculation, which is also a flow-based approach to capacity calculation about 6 months before the go live of that, which is foreseen to be, as you can see here, in March, April of 2024. In the beginning, we will have a extraction, which is ATC extraction, and we will publish both the ATC extracted capacities and the flow-based domain for the long-term capacity calculation timeframes. Mainly the capacity calculations is for forecasting purposes only, as there are just FTRs on the DK1, DK2 borders of the Nordic region. As I briefly mentioned in the beginning, there is an ongoing process awaiting an ACER decision regarding the Finnish and Swedish border. This is expected to be in 2022. We are currently having frequent stakeholder meetings in the Nordics to explain the progress of the capacity calculation project, which in the Nordics, we run the development of both the day-ahead intraday and the long-term development in one project. So we do this together for all time frames. So that was just a brief overview of the Nordic situation. I could just say that we will go fully over to flow-based for the long-term time frame when the single allocation platform can manage the flow-based parameters and allocate according to that. Until then, we will use the ATC extraction, which is the same algorithm that is used for ATC extraction for intraday or today in the day-ahead intraday method. So that was it on the Nordics. If there are no, so if you're welcome to ask any questions you want.
Thanks, Stefan. Unless there are some fast, immediate questions, I would maybe leave the feedbacks and questions for after the core presentation, to have them both together.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. So I saw the questionnaire about seeing or not seeing the slides. I hope that everybody sees the slides, and I will try to manage it in a more stable way. Now I would hand over to core TSOs about the core TSOs planning on the implementation of long-term CCM.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Zoran. What to say about the core long-term implementation that we shall go live on November 24 for yearly auctions. And so now we are working on a prototype and on the implementation on a prototype, allowing core TSOs to make some simulations about flow-based domain, and then to get more experience on that long-term flow-based calculation. Of course, we will organize an external parallel run according to the regulation 6 months before the go live. So it should happen around end of Q1 or early on Q2 2024. And we have regular exchanges with market parties during the core CCG meetings and the MESC meetings. Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe we'll wait for questions if there are some questions. Otherwise, there is not a lot to say about that implementation.
Okay, shall we move on then with the slides? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just one word concerning the external parallel run. Our wish is to collaborate with market parties and to involve market parties on the organization of the external parallel run. Because for us, external parallel run for long-term capacity calculation is new. That's something that we've never done before, and then that should be a time dedicated to market parties to get more and more experience and to get more familiar with the long-term capacity calculation, especially on the fact that we will change the allocation mode and then we will go to flow-based. So we would be very interested and very keen to receive your input about how do you see the external parallel run? What do you want that you do need for that external parallel run? Which data would be very tangible and relevant for you to get for gaining experience on that new allocation mode? And as well, what do you think about the KPIs? Which KPIs we shall monitor? We put as an example the KPIs for the UED. Don't take it as a given because some KPIs are not applicable for long term. But yeah, we would like to get your input. So maybe you can move on. Next slide. So yes, you see here, that's the current list for Core UED. Again, that's not a proposal, that's a figure, that's an example. And based on that example, we are very keen to collect all your ideas and all your inputs. So you can move, Zoran.
This is the second slide with KPIs. You want to go further on?
No, I will not detail here the KPIs because, again, that's the example about what the UED colleagues are doing. That could represent a basis to define the KPIs for long term, but we have to, we have to go through each KPI to see whether they are applicable for long term. But that's a basis and an invite for market parties to share their point of view about what we shall monitor that would be the most efficient for them. And here, so you have the graphical implementation timeline. Nothing new compared to what I said a few slides before. Yeah, you see that we shall start the development in 2023 in order to be ready for the testing period, the internal parallel run, and of course, external parallel run. And for that, you can see that in end of 2022, 2023, we have time slot dedicated to the define and draft the design and the approach that we would adopt for the external parallel run in close collaboration with market parties.
Okay, we have a hand raised from Michael.
Yes, hi. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. It was just on the timeline you show here. Which moments do you have interaction with market parties? On consultations, on workshops, on discussions, on the business requirements and those kind of things? How are you planning to organize that? I mean, that track.
So thanks for your question. For the course ACER, we already have some dedicated room for which in which we can discuss with market parties. That's the core consultative group meetings and the MESC meetings as well. And so we will use that room for discussing with and collaborate with market parties. Okay,
so you will include it in the core CG. Okay, so there's not a dedicated group that will discuss this. You will. No, it's just to know member of the core CG, so it's fine for me. It's just to know how we were planning to organize interaction with the market parties.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we obviously opened the Q&A session as we actually planned. So I invite our colleagues, market participants, to raise questions for both Nordics and core regions.
I see your hands raised, but I cannot see the name.
It's me, Hélène, speaking.
Okay, then.
Hi.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. To continue on the question raised by Michael, is there any consultation foreseen? I remember, I think you mentioned one on the EUR, but is there something else, or I'm a bit lost on the consultation process?
again, and what I can confirm for, and maybe some TSO colleagues will confirm as well, but we, for course ACER, we will use the core consultative group meeting to discuss that long-term topic. And the next meeting as well.
The core consultative group is not a formal, let's say it's a discussion group, but so there is no, let's say, additional consultation foreseen on the calculation process, on the capacity calculation process. I see a comment. Yeah, okay. So only discussions at the core CG.
For the moment, that's the plan.
Okay.
Then I don't know if in the future if there is somewhere a need, then we can Lena and Ruud that are your stakeholder manager.
Yeah. Okay.
We will see, but for the moment the plan is the CCG meeting.
And a question on the external parallel run. This external parallel run, will it focus on the calculation only, or can we expect that it also covers the allocation? So my point is, if to make it very clear, if, for instance, one indicator we would like to see is what would be the result of the allocation process using the flow-based calculation and allocation process, and using, for instance, the bids provided by market participants at the yearly auction, will it be feasible?
Alors, that roadmap that is on the screen is focused on capacity calculation. So for sure, that external parallel run will be focused on the capacity calculation. On the other hand, ENTSO-E colleagues set a long-term flow-based allocation group. And maybe if there is some of that colleagues around the table, you can maybe say or confirm that you will proceed as well some about some experimentation or some simulations, if there is ENTSO-E colleagues around the table.
Yes, here's Harald from APG. So of course, you will see also a timeline from the implementation of the allocation algorithm and a few slides later. And there you will see that we have, of course, also foreseen to have here a testing phase for implementation of the allocation algorithm, and therefore it is used or foreseen that we can use the outcome which is so far available from the capacity calculation group that we receive for our simulations and testing realistic results. Okay.
And so to finish, and then I leave the floor to others, but to determine the KPIs and how the parallel run will be organized, I see that the discussions are foreseen end of Q4 and in Q1 2023, right? And so this will take place via the core consultative group.
Yes, that's the plan, definitively. Okay. And yeah, we put that phase end of Q4 2022 and Q1, Q2 2023 for drafting and designing the external parallel run. But if you have already some inputs to provide, that would be more than welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Hélène.
We have Jerome for the next comment, please.
Yes, good morning. Jerome Lepage from EFET. So maybe just one clarification question around what we just discussed in relation to Michael and Hélène's question. So we'll have separate discussions on KPIs and design of parallel runs for each of the Nordic and then core capacity calculations. So that happens in different groups. And then the coordination about the effects on capacity calculation will be managed directly by ENTSO-E. Do we understand the governance of this whole thing properly?
I would say that yes, and maybe if ENTSO-E colleagues can confirm, but the capacity calculation will be implemented separately in Nordic and core, while ENTSO-E hands over the allocation, algorithm implementation, and design.
Okay, good. So it will be important for us to kind of really understand all those links and stuff, and make sure we have. I'm not sure we have the exact proper forum to. I mean, we have forums to discuss capacity calculation in the core CG or in the Nordic, in the equivalent Nordic group. But questions around capacity allocation, we'll need to see how we discuss that in practical terms with ENTSO-E. My other question was relating to the presentation from Stefan earlier on the Nordic timeline. So we saw the timeline and then a parallel run like next year, if I remember well, and then a series of long-term capacity calculation methodology amendments throughout 2024. So I was wondering how that was working and why there would be amendments of the LTCCM after the parallel run, and what impact would that have on the results of the parallel run? So how can we, if the methodology changes after the parallel run, how can we base our assessments on the parallel run of 2023?
Okay, Jerome, thank you for your questions. Well, the reason for the amendments of the long-term CCM is that they are defined in the current CCM as things that we need to update. So this will, of course, impact the calculation results, but we don't expect that these will have major impacts on the results, though. But of course, it will be a difference. That is correct. The main thing I think from the Nordic side is that we don't have really any type of long-term calculation at all, and we publish so-called what we call a planning domain currently for the next year. So this will be a more formalized, coordinated calculation, and also it will be flow-based parameters compared to the current information on NTC values on each border. So I think it's mainly a learning curve for everyone here. So that is why it's set up. But the amendments, they are done according to what is decided by ACER in the long-term methodology. So that is why they are there in the timeline. I hope this answers your questions. I'm sure it raises some additional questions, I guess, also for you. But yeah,
it does answer the why. I think what's fairly important for us is to understand once like some elements of a methodology are changed, like how does that affect like results that have been modeled in a parallel run. So ideally, and if you know that you're going to change the methodologies afterwards in any case, like understanding maybe how you could, if there are some parameters that will change, how you could like potentially easily recalculate some of the results of the parallel run would be helpful, I think. But yeah, of course, to be discussed later on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll take your point of view into consideration and try to solve this. This is, as you say, it's a year at least in the future. So there's quite some time for market participants to provide comments on this, of course, and how we set up the parallel rounds on the long term also.
Sure. Thank you.
Martin, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think Jerome raised a good question on the governance, and there may be some ideas we may need to optimize in the future together with ENTSO-E and TSOs. What is clear that there is also a single allocation platform, and it has a user group, and I would suggest that the single allocation platform takes the leading role in facilitating this towards stakeholders, and also I guess single allocation platform will do the parallel runs on the allocation part. But I say that we have now these three forums, so core, Nordic, and single allocation platform, both have stakeholder user group, and I see a bit of concern that how to coordinate those activities, and maybe I would suggest ENTSO-E and TSOs to appoint maybe one coordinator for the whole thing together, so that for the whole governance, so that everything is sort of coordinated and everything works as one. So I think we need to have one single coordinator for the whole project together, so that it combines all three sub projects. But maybe we need to discuss with ENTSO-E how to organize this in the most optimal way.
Okay. A question from Daniel in chat. Will this system replace JAO utility or complete it? Maybe for ENTSO-E to reply. So no reactions from ENTSO-E.
Sorry, come again, Soren.
So I cannot.
Could you come again, Soren, please?
So there was a question in chat. Will this system replace the JAO utility in the long run or complete it?
So if we understand well the question, it's Ludivine speaking for ENTSO-E. With the system, meaning the algorithm allocation, it will be part of the single allocation platform. So we are currently updating the single allocation platform requirements, and they will be taken into account by the SAP platform, meaning by JAO.
Okay, thanks, Ludivine. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Hélène speaking. We have started in the chat, but maybe I'm not informed, but I'm not aware of a JAO user group. And to be honest, I would not be at ease in terms of governance that the responsibility of stakeholder management for the allocation process lies on them. Of course, for the very practical aspects, it for me totally makes sense, but for the design elements, and I think we'll discuss that in the next part of the meeting, the decision made by ACER represents an enormous game changer for us in the foreign market. So given the impact, I think I would really not be at ease if the stakeholder management between now and the go live of the allocation process would be led by JAO. Yeah, more a comment than a question.
Yeah, I think we are open to all solutions. That I think that JAO is a part in this process. That's what I wanted to say. And of course, if JAO would organize this group, and I'm surprised there is no such group today. Forgive my lack of information. But I would assume we need a forum for stakeholders to discuss this, and if it doesn't exist, we need to establish it. And yeah, I would not see a problem if JAO takes the lead. Of course, TSOs are part of the group. They are there, but anyway, this is just some thoughts. I don't think we will solve these issues today, and I think we leave it to ENTSO-E and to us to discuss how to best organize this. But if you prefer to be involved via ENTSO-E directly, that's also possible.
May I add probably that this is more or less a logical consequence for me, as JAO is selected as the single point of contact, more or less, and the sub-operator for all allocations on the European level. And therefore, for me, it seems like a logical consequence if JAO is performing finally the long-term allocations, that also most of the contacts between market participants related to all operational stuff and testing is supported by JAO, and also the some basic discussions related to the design, related to the tools. So I do not fully see a benefit if there would be a change to another organization, I would say.
Yeah, Jerome.
Yeah, if I may chip in very quickly in this debate. So I think it's a question of, so JAO would be the service provider of the TSOs. So definitely, like, they need to be part of the debate, and they could be co-convener of a group. But a little bit along the lines of what's happening in day ahead and intraday discussions, having TSOs and regulators in the room is also important for us. So it's not just the service provider. If you transpose to day ahead or intraday, we're not just discussing with NEMOs. We're also discussing with TSOs and with regulators on how to best implement a model. And fundamentally, JAO is just there to provide a service to the TSOs. So in the past, so experience with JAO has been, we've had some difficulties for some like technical difficulties on their side, but also for questions of them not having the responsibility on what the TSOs are doing behind them. And lack of responsibility a little bit between JAO and the TSO. So if we only speak to JAO, like, we're missing half of the chain of responsibility. So that's why I think it would be very important to have, at the very least, like a group at the very least organized by the TSOs and JAO, ideally with the presence of regulators.
Okay, thanks. Unless there are some quick reactions, you might also continue through chat. I would like that we switch to the session 2 at this moment, and for the long-term flow-based allocation. And I would pass again to ENTSO-E for the general update on the process and allocation methodologies.
Yeah. Yes, hello, my name is Harald Haider. I raised my voice 2 times, even if it was not planned that. I am here in my role as the lead expert for the implementation of the long-term flow-based allocation algorithm project. And I am working at APG for more than 10 years now, mainly dealing with network codes, FCA, CICM, congestion income distribution, and especially in the long term and day ahead market coupling, harmonized allocation rules, and so on. So today we start, or I start with a general update of the project, how far, what has done in the last time since the last workshop, and then an update of the amendment of the methodologies. So maybe to go to the next slide, please. Yes. As a general update or a bit kind of reminder, I can say together this project is an all TSO project, so it is on European level, but based on the fact that long-term flow-based shall be implemented first in core and Nordic CCRs. So these are a bit the leading regions where we are doing the tasks at the moment. So on the one hand, there is a very strong working stream on ENTSO-E level related to the old TSOs. And then it is, of course, very important that together or in parallel, we bring this discussion and input to the regional level. In the first step, it was requested from us that for the implementation of long-term flow-based allocation, especially we update 4 methodology. This is the single allocation platform, the congestion income distribution, the firmness and remuneration cost methodology, as well as the harmonized allocation rules. We presented and published in the meantime this high-level market design document. This was a starting document. I would like to raise this, especially that this is not the final version. It was a starting document that we have a basis for discussion, and this is already published on ENTSO-E website, so you can have a look. This is this document is giving the general ideas how this long-term flow-based allocation shall be implemented. Further on, currently, we are working on the requirements and process description, of course, based on this high-level market design document. And here we started a very close coordination with CHAO and the regional security capacity calculation entities, how to implement, in fact, the capacity calculation and then come from the capacity calculation process to the allocation process, including all needs for market participants as from the allocation up and information of available capacities until information and publishing to the results. The next, the last bullet point on this slide is this is a second workshop. In email conversation prior, there was also the request how it will continue, and here I can say probably just now that also for September, October, we will plan a third workshop. Again, for inviting all the market participants to discuss with us the developments in this process. So the next slide, please. So the first methodology I would like to discuss in detail is the single allocation platform amendment. Here, please be aware that the content we present here is a bit more as it was presented to or sent to you by the slides prior this workshop. The background behind is that in the meantime we make relative good progress in this methodology. So at the moment we are in a status that we send this methodology for legal checks to our legal entities at CHAO and for the TSOs and ENTSO-E. So it's a quite final stage we have reached here. For the sub-amendment, And I would like to give you today here an overview what is new in this sub, what have changed, what is updated. So the most important point, of course, for the updating the sub methodology is that we have to add all points related to flow-based allocation mechanism. This was specially done with the articles 38 and 16 in this sub methodology. So we added formulas for the implementation of long-term flow-based allocation. The formulas are identical to the formulas from the high-level market design document so far. And the second, in the annex, we defined a lot of requirements towards the single allocation platform operator for operating the tool, more or less. Then, of course, the proposal has also updated with the NTC allocation algorithm. Also here for NTC, the formulas were added now to the sub methodology, including also technical profiles. Why? Just now, only now we added this NTC allocation because we have this NTC allocation since long time. The basis is that the sub methodology was one of the very first methodologies which were written and finalized. And in this first version of finalizing the sub methodology, the implementation of CHAO as a single point of contact and being the sub single allocation platform for European long-term allocations was the focus, especially how the governance shall be and what has to be, which groups shall be made, and so on and so on. How is CHAO itself regulated? This was the main content of the original first version, and now we added all this, I would say, more operational related things. In addition to the main sub document, we drafted an explanatory document, and this explanatory document is explaining also by some examples what has how the long-term allocation mechanism would work on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is also a good guide to say what is new, what has updated. So this is a kind of assistance document for reading the main sub amendment. It is foreseen now that the sub proposal to be submitted to ACER for ACER approval as requested by ACER with the 1st of October 2022 this year. So what has changed in detail in the whereas new paragraphs were explaining the need for the amendment for the introduction of flow-based based on the regulatory requirements we had, that we have to implement this long-term flow-based allocation also based on FCA Article 10 for capacity calculation. Then on definitions and interpretation, there was more or less one new definition added related to the technical profile we currently have on the Polish, Czech, Slovak, German bidding border. This was necessary because we included these formulas and the technical description also for the NTC allocation. Then in Article 13, cooperation of sub-parties, we added or we made a bit more precise description how and which user groups shall be made by Chow and how market participants in future shall be considered directly or by use of by this user group. So for instance, I can remember we have also written that there shall be workshops organized by Chow direct to market participants, for instance. And then there are a number of quite minor, I say, wordings. We updated in the capacity curtailment and nomination, in the auction rules determination, for the notice board and the auction cancellation. But these were more or less changing of the wordings that to clarify the sub methodology. So then let's go to the next slide, please. The most important things, as I already mentioned, was that we have to implement the new articles for allocation algorithm formulas. This was done with article. Yes.
Can I guess I don't see that two hands raised on this slide. Maybe
yeah.
we can take them now.
Okay. So, Jérôme?
Yeah, actually, my questions relate to 2 slides ago, but also some of the stuff that you said on the previous slides. So about NTC, so you say like there were amendments around like for flow-based allocation, but also like to re-specify NTC, including technical profiles. So I'm a bit lost. Are we talking about amendments around NTC for other regions than core or Nordic, or we're talking about NTC also in core and Nordic? And in that case, why is this just until we have flow-based allocation or anything else?
If I spoke from amendments, I did not mean that the NTC process at all is amendment anyhow. We only amended, if I say amendment, then I mean that we added this now as it is currently implemented to the sub methodology.
Okay.
So it is not an amendment of the methodologies at all. It is an amendment in the document, in the meaning that we added this in the same way as we added the flow-based methodology to the document. We added now also the formulas and processes for NTC allocation as it currently is implemented, because this was not done in the original version. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, it does. But then my second question would be like a bigger one, also related to the whole discussion we have on some of the requirements of market participants around like long-term flow-based allocation is, so I understand that you've already proposed some of the amendments on the for the long-term flow-based allocation. And I had understood from the the document circulated by ENTSO-E earlier this month that those were still projects, and even though like you were heading in a direction, that we were still discussing this. So I'm a little bit confused about timelines and about also when our input can be taken into account, and including the one that we'll be making today, if anyway this has already been sent to ACER by ENTSO-E. So
no, this had not been sent to ACER. It is, as I said, it's the final versions are now approved by TSOs, legal experts, and also by the ENTSO legal experts before it goes to the finalization of these groups. And then it is planned, to send this or to submit this with 1st of October to ACER. And as I understood, because there is, we make this workshop now to get the feedback and to explain what has changed in this methodology and to inform market participants, and probably as I understood at least, but maybe Soren can answer this, and then it is planned from ACER also to circulate this document as we have it sent for approval, and market participants can see and comment this on that stage.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I had misunderstood the timeline, so thank you.
Are there any further questions?
Hélène
Hélène?
speaking. I had similar question to Jérôme, so I will not repeat. Sorry, but for me the NTC part is still not very clear. So is it my understanding after your feedback to Jérôme is that they were part of the documents that were not up to date on the NTC, and you took the opportunity now to update them? No.
Yes, that's fully correct. But it's
okay.
even more, this NTC part was not included at all. So it was not updated, it is newly added.
So let's say it's an update that has nothing to make with the flow-based projects?
No.
Okay.
But because the background is we will start with flow-based in the Nordic and in the core CCRs, but we still have other CCRs with explicit allocations continuing, and therefore now we have in both methodologies in this sub-methodology considered.
Okay. And then my second question was a bit similar to Jérôme's second question, but still I'm still confused because you mentioned indeed, so I understand the document will be, or the methodology will be submitted to ACER in October, but you mentioned you are in the final stage of checking the document. So is there still time or possibility to modify, in particular, the A39 points with the algorithm formulas?
There is, it is clearly to say that ACER is a decision-making body, and therefore we can finalize and make a proposal and send this to ACER, but then the decision-making body is ACER. And as I understood, you can also comment then this document, and we will see how it is finally then approved.
But is there any chance that the points we will be discussing at the workshop and that we have been discussing in length in January workshop, I mean, in terms of process, I feel a bit that again we are at the end of the process, and that our points have not been taken into account. I don't want to spoil the presentation we'll be making in a moment, but if you are at ENTSO-E side, if you are at the finalization of the methodology and in particular of the point A39, is there any chance that ENTSO-E can still update their proposal before submitting it to ACER?
Of course, there is a change, but we will explain with the following slides, especially in the next part of the slides and of this workshop, how the TSO position at the moment is. And that's a bit the pity, because we have a very tight timeline, and it's the problem if we can really include all the requests from market participants. We are quite aware and we fully understand this, but it's a bit the problem if we can indeed consider this within the given timeline. So TSOs are open to hear and follow ideas coming from the market participants. However, how and when to implement is still a bit under discussion, of course.
Okay, and you mentioned we have the possibility to comment. It means that this SAP methodology, it will be published? Because how can we comment it otherwise?
This depends, in fact, what ACER is doing. we do not, TSOs are not forced to make a public consultation based on the sub-proposal, and therefore we make these kind of workshops to keep market participants informed and also to have reactions and position from market participants. This is also why we know in the meantime that you have some concerns, especially related to the allocation algorithm. So especially also TSOs are quite aware of this problem and willing to discuss this and to find solutions if possible together.
Okay, but so we cannot comment this methodology, just to be clear, because I think it's better to be clear and not give us the hope that we can comment it. We can make, let's say, informal comment during a workshop, but we all know the fact that it doesn't have the same value as a formal presentation.
It is indeed at the moment not foreseen to have a public consultation before we send the document to ACER.
Okay. Okay, I take note, but I think it's a big disappointment on the process about this. So just to share this.
Yes, but it's also one of the facts caused by the extreme tight timelines.
But we came with the inputs early January, yeah? So I think the time was there to include them. But let's take the point for the discussion after.
Okay.
Harald, we go on with the slides.
Yeah. Okay. So especially on Article 39, as I already said, there is the new allocation algorithm described for NTC and flow-based, and the requirements of the tools, performance, such like supporting products, find solutions for the algorithm, and so on, are now formulated in an additional new Annex 1. Where we have general requirements, qualitative requirements, performance requirements on the one hand, and requirements also what shall be the output, the results of the algorithm, and related to their already mentioned allocation constraints, to consider also these requirements. So we can go to the next slide. Here now, after the single allocation platform methodology, the updates to the other methodologies, there is first the congestion income distribution. Here we are currently discussing two options intensively within ENTSO-E level or on ENTSO-E level. The main target or focus is that we consider now in for the updated CAD methodology the specific characteristics of long-term flow-based allocation also for the congestion income distribution process. However, it is to say that congestion income distribution is something which is done purely by TSOs, how they share the allocated congestion income between themselves. So it's not directly related to the market participants. A bit more related to the market participants is the FRC, the firmness and remuneration cost article. This article is strongly related to the congestion income distribution process. However, the most important information here for market participants is that the long-term remuneration based on the market spread is currently not under discussion. So there we are probably not changing anything in this point. And then finally, we have the HAR amendment. Here we agreed together with ACER that we will update the HAR in the frame of the regular biannual updating process, which is done in, or which is to be done within next year. So for Q3 2022, we hope that we have implemented the basic changes in the HAAS and to send the HAAS finally then for approval to ACER is this March 2023. I come now to the timeline. Here you see especially that from Q2 until Q3 2023 for all methodologies, there is indeed interaction with market participants and planned on the one hand by MESC meetings and on the other hand by doing workshops and having also probably some conversation by mail. So we plan especially for this time where we do the planning and design phase. We have intensive coordination and cooperation, if possible, also with market participants for all methodologies. And then in beginning with Q4 2022 until most of the time in 2023, there is the technical development phase. However, in middle 2023, we are starting with the testing phase, where after TSO testing probably also then there will be some kind of parallel run and testing together with the market participants, so that we hopefully can start or finalize this kind of testings in Q4 2024 and start with the long-term flow-based allocation, as you also have seen for the capacity calculation timeline with January 2025. So this was the first part from my side. If there are any questions.
Yes, I can read. There are interesting proposals by Jerome and Helene on the chat related to SAP and public consultation, what was already mentioned, but maybe also Helene could provide oral feedback. I see the hand raised. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, the first one is a comment. I think I made it already. The second point is rather on the determination of the parallel run. So I raised a question in the calculation process and I've been told to bring it here. So I think what we want to see at the end of the day is the impact on the allocated volumes. So how the new methodology will influence or impact the allocated volumes on the different borders. So my question is, how exactly and when will the specs for the parallel run be determined, and do we have a chance to be listened in, at least in that process, so that we do not end up in a situation where we are too late and the deadline is too tight to include this kind of request for publication?
The thing is that currently we are working, or the long-term capacity calculation expert groups are developing the algorithm or the tools to calculate the long-term flow-based domains, and then only based on this long-term flow-based domain we can make some first simulations and tests how much capacity is available and have a look indeed what will be the results, or what could be the results which could be expected. So we need some time to implement this tool, as I already said, within the next time or next, especially for the allocation algorithm in 2023. And then there is, of course, a testing, and we will see the results and what finally could be offered and is allocated to market participants. But in principle, the flow-based algorithm from the theoretical aspect should be as efficient, at least, as the NTC approach.
no, then I disagree. It's not a question of efficiency. The methodology to allocate is drastically different, and we'll allocate, we'll have to make arbitrage between the different borders. We saw in the study of ACER that the level of allocated capacity was way below the historical one, because it was allocating more volumes where the spread was high, so collecting more TSO congestion rent at the border with a high spread, but the volumes were much lower. So I just repeat, and I don't know where we need to say that, but what we would like to see is the impact on allocated volumes. So we do not have issues or concerns on the efficiency of the algorithm process. I hope this will be okay. My point is really, could we see simulations of the impact of allocated volumes per border? So I hope that if we raise this point now, that there is time by 2023, 2024 to make sure this request can be taken into account.
I hope so too. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, since there is no
So
formal
this is, of course, the target of
TSO
TSO and ENTSO-E to evaluate this and to have a close look to all these things. However, probably we can also come back to this question, because we have then a next part, especially dedicated to this allocation algorithm. And not because now we are at the methodologies, and we will have some additional information in this in the slides and in the next presentations, and maybe this slides also are assisting to answer some questions we are starting to discuss now here.
Maybe just to add to this point, as you know, there is a legal obligation for when switching to NTC to flow-based, there is a legal obligation to test the new system with market participants at least for 6 months. So TSOs have the legal obligation to make a parallel external test with participants for at least 6 months. And during these 6 months, of course, you will be able to see the impact on allocated capacities on welfare, on all the differences compared to NTC. So I do assume this is a legal obligation, and the ENTSO-E or TSOs will have to respect this.
Okay, thanks, Jérôme. Maybe you can provide your comment from the chat as well.
Yeah, I think more generally, in building on the Harald and Martin's interventions, I think what is important when we see a red bar throughout Q2 and Q3 of this year on interaction on the SAP proposal, when we hear about parallel runs, etc. Like, I think the comments in the chat that I made and that other made as well, it's really related to, okay, interaction is nice, parallel runs are very important, but how do we learn from them, and how do we are we in a position to initiate change potentially? So that's really the thing that we would like to make sure, is that it's not just an interaction because we need to do an interaction, and it's just not a parallel run just because we need to do a parallel run. It's more so how do we make sure that this process actually brings value, like in terms of social welfare, by also listening to market participants' needs and ideally implementing change where we see the need for it. So like right now, in terms of stakeholder interaction, after like 4 months after the first workshop, we're not entirely sure that we're getting actually results on these interactions. I think that's the main point. And we understand the tight timelines and stuff like this, but it's also about implementing something that makes sense.
If I may react to this, so we do fully acknowledge this concern. Also, ACER, when approached ENTSO-E did expect and asked ENTSO-E to consult also on the sub-requirements. So we had this assumption, expectation that, because the sub-requirements are the main document which will define the allocation algorithm and will define basically the main elements of this change. But we were sadly informed that there is no time for that. We can't influence that. So as a second best, what we can offer, ACER will consult, of course, publicly on the proposal, and you will be heard at that time. But before that, I would still invite ENTSO-E whether they can share the draft document informally, whether there can be another short workshop in June or July on this document, specifically on this document. So I invite ENTSO-E to at least do a second best if official consultation is not possible, because this is important document that it's going to determine the future.
Thank you, Marlin. I think we would really welcome that because you'll also be in tight timeline. So like the more time passes, the fewer the opportunities, I guess, to incite change. So thank you.
Any other comments? If not, before switching to optimization function, I would propose that we make a very short break of 5 minutes and then come back in 11:25. Thank you. Okay. If you have made your coffee, we can continue with market participants' proposal, alternative proposal on the optimization functions. If you like, I can change the slides for you.
Okay. All right. So I will be making the presentation on behalf of IFET Euroelectric. What we want to explain you today is how we think that the long-term flow-based allocation optimization function should be designed in order to match the market participant needs and to match the FCA requirements that the hedging needs of the market should be met and should be fulfilled. So I will do my best to explain that to you. It's of course echoing what we presented to you in January, so nothing really new in terms of concept, but we try to elaborate the presentation or the proposal, making it more concrete, coming with details and proposals. So if you can go to next slide. So this is a reminder, but I think it's important to once more explain that for us, long-term transmission rights are hedging instruments allowing us to hedge, so to be protected, so to not be influenced anymore by the price risk, so by the variation of the cross-border transmission price. To be very clear, if the value of the forward spreads would be the only thing that would matter to us, so the absolute value of the spreads, we would never need long-term transmission rights. So if you would have a 10 euro spread between two bidding zones and those bidding zone spread would not vary, so it would always be 10, nobody in the market would buy a long-term transmission rights. We only buy a forward transmission rights in one bidding zone, and we would only buy the volume in one bidding zone and sell the equivalent volume in the other one, and we would be sure that the price difference would not change, so we would not need this long-term transmission right. We only need it if there is a chance that the difference between the two bidding zones varies. So the risk related to the volatility of the bidding zone price difference is a crucial risk in the market. Where there is a crucial risk in the market, this is where we need to hedge. If there is no risk, there is no need to hedge. The more the spread varies over time, the more long-term transmission rights are useful for market participants, and hence the more they are valued. Okay, so the more variation risk, the more value the hedging instrument has. And basically, we are convinced that long-term transmission rights should be allocated where hedging opportunities are the most needed. So if the optimization function is equal to the TSO income at the auction or the surplus, how you call it, there is a very big risk that volumes, that transmission rights will be allocated at the borders where the spread is high, even if the expected variation of the spread is low. So for us, the optimization function that is presented in the draft market design document does not address this concern, because it only says that the transmission rights will be allocated by maximizing the surplus at the moment of the auction. So this is really a strong concern. We would have hoped that because we brought them in January, there would be a lot of time before the submission of the SAP methodology to ACER. So we would have hoped that there would be sufficient time to think about a solution for accommodating those concerns. We see that there is none at this stage. So we understood we will have the possibility to give the comments to ACER, and that ACER suggested to publish the draft SAP documents, to which we will comment, but our comments will be the same, basically. we think that's very, very important to make sure that the allocation rights are allocated where the variation of the spreads is high and not where the absolute value of the spread is high. Okay, if you can go to next slide. So again, some reflection, and I mentioned it in the introduction as well, but the forward capacity allocation guideline does not clearly define hedging, that's true, but it clearly mentions that the hedging opportunities must be promoted for market participants. Where market participants see the need for hedging opportunities should be privileged rather than maximizing the surplus or the TSO income at the moment of the auction. And considering the volatility of spreads in the optimization function, we know this, so our proposal would require long discussions. So we understand the tight deadlines, and we understand that it's not an easy request. It's not an easy topic. It's complex. It would be difficult to agree on the precise right metrics or KPIs to use. And this could have risk to delay the project, but we think it is not impossible. And we certainly do not want to delay the implementation of the project. We are, of course, fully supportive of the project. But what we want to ensure is that changes will be doable in the future, if not now. And we are concerned that if we define today the optimization function in the way it is in the draft document, it will be very complex, if not impossible, to modify it in the future. We all see the difficulties to make changes when a process is already live. Small comparison with the XBit project where we are trying to have some modifications. We all see the difficulties about that. So we think it's wiser to foresee the opportunity or the possibility to include our concerns right now and to pursue the discussions on the right metric and the details later in the coming months. So concretely, if we go to the next slide, what we propose, we come with a constructive proposal in a way forward, is to make sure to modify the objective function that is described in the draft document, to make sure we promote the most useful hedging opportunities for market participants. So in practice, we propose to having the possibility to decompose the bid price of the market participant into two terms. The first one being the absolute value of the spread, reference, forward reference price, and the second one being the extra risk premium that market participants are putting on top of the value of the spread, and to have the possibility to weight them differently. This would give the possibility to continue the discussion in the coming months while not slowing down the next steps of the project. Then in parallel to determine a method, to establish a method to determine the value of the underlying and the value of the risk premium. So how to make this decomposition, that should be developed and properly described. And then to see how to weight the different components of the bids. So if you put equal weight to both coefficients or to both components, you end up actually in the proposal made by ENTSO-E. So basically, our proposal does not prevent the initial proposal to go through. We just make it a bit more elaborated so that if possible and if agreed at the end by all parties, we can go towards an implementation, an allocation methodology that better meets the requirements or the needs for hedging from the markets. So yeah, it avoids to have to modify an algorithm after when the process is already live. So if you go to next slide, I have a small illustration of this. So this graph represents, so the vertical bar represents the total bid price in gray, P. So this is the price market party would bid. And this price can actually be split or decomposed into two components. And this is how market participants are making their bids. There is the value of the underlying forward spread between the two bidding zones at the bidding zone border. And then there is a risk premium or an additional value that market participants are putting on top. And basically, the more the chance to have that the spread vary, the bigger the blue box will be. And so if you see here, we have represented two borders, the border 1 and the border 2. Although they have the same bid price, they come from two different situations. So the first one has a high spread, but a low extra premium. And the second one, there is a low spread, so low orange component, but a high extra risk premium. And what does that mean? It means that the market participant and the second border have more interest to buy a long-term transmission rights because they think that there is more chance that the spread will vary. So again, if the forward spread would be the only information, the only thing that matters, so the orange bar, we would not need long-term transmission rights. What makes the need for long-term transmission rights is the chance that the spreads vary or the risk that the spread vary. And again, we think that given the market context in which we are, and by the way, this has been promoted by the Commission and mentioned in the study of ACER, I think it's the recommendation number 5, we need to increase the liquidity of forward markets, and ACER mentioned also in the study that the integration of forward markets needs to be reinforced. And basically, if the optimization function is wrongly calibrated, we think that the objective to reinforce the integration of forward markets and liquidity in the forward markets will not be met. So it would be a pity. And this is now the right timing to make sure we do things properly. And repeating it once again, our proposal does not jeopardize or does not prevent later on to come back to the, let's say, basic proposal to maximize the surplus at the auction. It has more flexibility. It allows to do both approaches. And therefore, we think that it should be updated in the SAP document right now. So I hope I was clear. We hope we can have a good discussion now, and that we can convince you that this is the right approach to meet the need from the market participants to ensure allocation of rights where they are needed.
Okay, thanks, Hélène. Now we have time for discussion. So just, I don't know whether ENTSO-E would present their reflections to your proposals, or maybe to have a quick round of first questions, if somebody would comment at this moment. Yes, Ulrich. Then Martin Polkowski.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. Ulrich Müller from Energinet. I work in the market department. I have a clarifying question to Helene. Could you go back to your slide, the first slide you showed us? I think you said somewhere that the capacity is allocated in order to maximize TSO income at the auction. I think, is that fully correct? It's a question, because my understanding is that capacity is allocated according to the bids provided from market participants, meaning the willingness to pay for transmission rights. And then, if that's true, I would say that if some borders are characterized by high volatility, high unexpected volatility, my guess would be that the willingness to pay for capacity at these borders would be high. And in this way, you would allocate capacity towards these borders on expense of other borders, meaning that your concern will actually be managed in this way. So could you try to explain what you yeah, could you clarify a bit more on why the current design on allocation based on willingness to pay does not address your concern?
Yeah, it's because the willingness to pay, as you call it, I think it's a good term, can be completely sunk into the total price. So imagine you have a border with a high structural spread, but a low volatility. That's the border 1. And then border 2 has a low absolute spread, so it's usually around 0 or €1, but there is a super high volatility around this low price. The willingness to pay at the second border will be low compared to the total value at the first border, so it will be sunk. So that is why the measurement of the willingness to pay should not be the total bid, which encompass both the intrinsic value, so the value of the spread plus the risk premium, but only the second part, the orange part.
Yeah, but if the border characterized by high volatility is a border, as I understand what you're saying, is a border characterized by low volumes. It's a small border, it's little capacity.
Why small volume? Sorry.
Could you try to explain once again what is the characteristics of a border with high volatilities? Why should the willingness to pay for these borders not be high from market player side? If the volatility is unexpected,
will be high. Maybe Jérôme, you can try. Otherwise, I continue. Please go ahead.
No, I'm thinking. So the volatility at that border is dependent on the market spread, like between the two markets. So you have two markets that are like very volatile, or that like don't always go in the same direction, don't follow each other, etc. So like for me, that's rather independent from the volumes made available at that border in terms of capacity, transmission capacity itself. So it's really about the interaction between two markets. And then as Hélène explained, like if you try to think about that last illustration that was shown in the presentation, we showed two bits that look exactly the same. But imagine if the first bit, where we have a large like part of the underlying, is 10 times as high as the second bit that we see on the graph. Like even though market participants place more value there, like into absolute value on like the blue part, the beta 2, if you have an underlying that is 10 times as big at the bidding zone border 1, then the extra value that market participants are actually really placing, like in addition to the underlying of the spreads, that's completely uncomparable. So there will still be willingness to buy forward transmission rights on both sides, because we attribute some value, like we give a blue value, let's say, to each of those bidding zone borders, but they will be completely different and not really comparable in an algorithm if you take the total bid price.
If you make an analogy, when we trade options on forward contracts, the broker or the counterparty will only ask you the blue part. He will never ask you your price as the gray component. So the measurement of the price at which you are willing to buy an option is not the gray, it's only the blue. So the value of the underlying product does not matter in pricing an option. So if you compare two options here, the bidding zone border 1 and bidding zone border 2, those are options, and those are not energy, those are options. And you compare them with the gray, with the sum of the two, the risk is that the border where the volatility is high, the component pricing this optionality, this volatility can be completely sunk or hidden in the gray value.
But Helen, may I ask you, on a non-volatile border with a high market spread, this market spread, from where this market spread then would come? From my understanding, this market spread is also a function of the market, of the bids, and therefore it is caused and made by the bidding strategy of market participants, because not of volatility, because of other reasons probably, but it is also a result of the market indicating the value on that bidding zone border for market participants. And this is not because of the volatility probably on this bidding zone border, but because of other functionality. But indeed, it is also a market spread made definitely by the market.
It's related to the forward prices in the two bidding zone, and there can be structural difference in the power system of those two bidding zone that could explain a structural price difference. So if I make, I don't know, you could have a bidding zone 1 and a bidding zone 2 with a border, and imagine that for next year, in bidding zone 1, there are a lot of nuclear outages foreseen, nuclear maintenance, okay, compared to previous year. And so because of those planned nuclear outages, it's public information I'm talking to, of course. The market knows that in this bidding zone 1, structurally, it's going to be tight. And so there is the forward price for this bidding zone that is quite high compared to the neighboring bidding zone. And there is, so structurally, there is a difference in the power system explaining a price difference between the two zones. So if it is a structural difference for which there is expectation that it will not evolve compared to between today and the delivery, the volatility of the spreads will be quite low, although there will be structurally a price difference between the two zones.
Yes, but this is more or less confirming what I said, that obviously not only volatility is a relevant market parameter, but also other topics like generation or availability of capacity between two on a bidding zone border, which was the basic intention if we see the congestion income methodology, that congestion income which is generated has to be used to build up new lines, for instance, or for maintenance or replacement of new lines. So this is one of the reasons why TSOs are obliged to have congestion income. And this is the one hand. And of course, the other hand is this aspect of the volatility, which is from my understanding, this is has to be priced from the market, from the market traders accordingly, similar to the other position, how much capacity is available, and making markets different in the price. Because this is more or less the main competence of market traders to consider and put this volatility in the correct pricing for themselves on the individual bidding zone border. Because if we consider this in our algorithm, then we took away from the market traders some competence how to consider this volatility. And this, I'm not sure if this is really something which has to be seen in a positive way, that TSOs here based on a fixed algorithm, which is the same, of course, on every bidding zone border, took away, I say, competence, which is core competence or shall be core competence from market traders to the algorithm.
If I may ask, maybe Martin Palkowski has a hand raised for a long time, and we will have another opportunity to continue this discussion, which is the main the main part of the meeting. So Martin, then Michal Kloss. Yeah?
Thank you. I have a question concerning this orange thing. Since we do not have this as a product, it doesn't exist at the moment. So I think that it's normal, or it works on every border, that we just offer the gray one, the gray part. So my question is, so it's indeed inherent to the product itself that we combine the both orange and the blue parts in one product. So the price for the whole thing is in fact covering both the components. And my question is, in case the left one would be higher than the right one, why should the right one get the capacity, even though it provides the lower value to the system? So the willingness of pay for the left, the BZB1, is higher, but the capacity would be allocated to the bit which provides in system lower willingness to pay. That I do not understand. Could you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, I think I got your question. To me, because the right one, this is where there is more interest for the market to buy long-term transmission rights, because market participants want to be protected about the variation of the spread. And for the system, if there is no or low volatility, the orange, so the intrinsic value of the spread, will be collected anyway in the day-ahead market coupling. So if the spread is structurally always the same, the congestion rent will anyway be collected. A long-term transmission right is a protection against the variation of the spread. The congestion rent will be collected in the day-ahead. So the mean of the long-term transmission right is not to collect surplus at the moment of the auction. Is there to give hedging tools to the market, to suppliers that are selling fixed price to their clients, to generators that want to hedge their production.
So you consider the orange part as a risk-free?
If there is no volatility, yes, the orange will be there. I mean, if structurally the spread is the same value and there is no volatility, the orange will not vary and will be collected anyway in the day-ahead market coupling.
Thank you.
Okay, Michal Kloss, please, then Jérôme.
Thank you. I have a question in a similar thread. So generally, I have a feeling that you underestimate the orange part when it comes to value for the market participants. Why? Because you claim that if there is no volatility, no one would buy LTTRs. And in fact, LTTRs have their value, and they are also, this value is also connected to the price spread, expected price spread between the bidding zones. And what I have a problem with understanding over here is actually the logic of this picture, because I guess that it is possible that A1 on the left-hand side of the picture represents the expected price difference between zones, but it doesn't necessarily need to represent the value of the financial instrument for the market participants. And the evaluation of market participants can be different than actual prognosis of the price differences. So actually, when I take a look at this picture, I can see two components, and I can see that there is no intrinsic need for distinguishing between the blue component and the orange component. And what I would like to ask you for is to give me the explanation why, at the same time, you claim that, for example, in case there is only orange component, nobody would bid the particular LTTR, and on the other side, you give a fairly high price for the instrument, which is practically 80% of the value of the LTTR in case of bidding zone 1. I don't know if I was clear asking the question.
I think so. I try to answer you. So my point, but maybe I was not clear. So my point is that the gray bar is indeed the market participant bid. So of course, in the market participant bids, there is the current forward value of the spread. That is a given. Let's assume we have an agreed reference price for the forward market of the two bidding zones. And then, of course, this market participant thinks that the spread will evolve. So he will add a component to that, depending on his market view. And my point was, if you would be sure, so today we are in May 2022, and imagine we look at the forward price between A and B for 2023, and the difference between the two is 5 euros, okay? Let's assume. And you have a crystal ball, you know it will always stay at 5 euros, always, it will never vary. So if A increases, B increases, so that the difference between A and B is always perfectly equal to 5. So you know that at any moment in time, you can buy A and sell B for 5 euros. Why would you buy a long-term transmission rights? Because in any moment in time, you can change your hedges in A and B and reverse your spread if you want for 5 euros. So in that case, the blue component will be 0 because you know that the evolution of the spreads will always be the same.
But I get your answer partially because this is actually a rhetorical question, not to me, but to you. If you're asking the question why you would buy this instrument, my question is why would you give so high orange price for it? Why would you value it so high?
But because maybe in B, there is a shortage in nuclear availability next year. And in A, there is a massive new investment. And so we know that next year, in A, there will be a high surplus of generation. And in B, there will be a high shortage of electricity. And so structurally, we know that B will always be 5 euros more expensive than A.
But it only proves the validity of the orange price and the fact that it shouldn't be undermined. Let's skip it for a moment because I have the second thread. For me, buying the LTT, taking part in the auction is actually to buy the instrument. So you are not just, let's say, broadcasting your market-related preferences or prognosis, but you are making an offer in order to obtain the instrument. And what I see as an underlying consequence of your proposal is that if the algorithm drives in the direction which is proposed so that the blue component and the orange component are actually treated differently, then in the bids of the market participants, the blue component, which is to be presumably be more important, would dominate. So what would you do as a market participant in such situation? You are to obtain the instrument. You want your 10 euros, for example, to be as impactful and as possible. And you have two options to let's say, pots to divide 10 euros for. I would say that everything for me is related to blue component then. And this way I would try to get as much instruments as possible for me if there is market related preference for blue components. So I'm not saying that it's wrong or that it's unwise. I see some missing points in order to create a compatible structure as a proposal still. But thank you for your presentation. It was very insightful.
Jérôme, please, then I would stop because we have 2 more presentations. Yes, so if you can be brief.
Sure, thanks. Maybe a few quick thoughts. So I think, like, building on the last intervention, sure, there's probably more to discuss for all of us to understand how market participants like actually construct their bids in the markets, like how to differentiate those different elements. What weights would we like to attribute to, would we agree collectively to attribute to the different components? But Yeah, so this is part of the discussion. What we want to make sure is that while the discussion is happening, we don't end up at the end of the discussion with like the impossibility to change or like the high difficulty to change things. So we're seeing already now in the process when we're supposed to be deciding collectively on that methodology and interacting, that it's already too late. Think about how that would look like when the system is already in place. So our plea now is really to make sure that we have an open door for a quick change of algorithm elements, and rather than needing to change completely the algorithm itself. And maybe a quick reminder, because I heard like TSOs are obliged to collect congestion income in the forward time frame, whether it concerns the forward or the ahead and intraday time frames. Looking at the electricity directive and regulation, like congestion income is like an additional thing that is provided to finance the activities of TSOs. Like the objective is not to, like the objective of all this market is not to maximize congestion income. So it's a useful tool to signal things like needs for transmission capacity, these kind of things. It can be used for different purposes, to guarantee firmness, to reinvest in infrastructure, to come to the help of consumers through network tariffs. But the whole point of what we're doing today is indeed to improve the quality of forward markets and to direct those long-term transmission rights to where the market participants' hedging needs are. So that would be it for me.
Thanks, Jerome. I would kindly ask other colleagues to hold their questions until we finish the two remaining presentation, then we can continue with the discussion, please. So the next one is ENTSO-E again, and reflections on MP's concerns.
Yes, it's it's again a part I will present. So indeed, based on the last workshop, TSOs had several discussions how to see and how they could consider the concerns of market participants, and therefore now I would like to give our first reactions from TSO's side. This workshop was done on the 27th of January. As TSOs understood main concerns of the market participants, there was that they said, okay, based on the or considering long-term flow-based allocation in the future, it could happen that there is almost zero or zero allocated long-term rights on on bidding zone borders, where currently capacity is allocated, and with the NTC approach, this is one concern we heard from TSO side, and the other concern was that capacity is allocated to bidding zone borders with higher price bids, while traders are actually more eager to hedge in border with this volatility price spread. This is what we already discussed now, and indeed, yes, we heard this also and try to give our feedback now to these questions. The goal of the presentation is therefore to present from TSO side first reflections on the allocation algorithm and how TSOs definitely see its functionality for allocation. So let's go to the next slide. And here I have to say, especially for TSOs, we are operating in an extreme binding legislation environment. That means that we are it's very rare that TSOs can decide something. Basically, TSOs are bounded to a lot of regulatory stuff, and here I would like to present you two of these regulatory things which are written in the electricity regulation 2019-943. It's Article 16.1. Network congestion problems shall be addressed with non-discriminatory market-based solutions which give efficient economic signals to the market participants and transmission system operators involved. So here we speak from efficient economic signals. And in Article 16.6, in the case of congestion, the valid highest value bids for network capacity, whether implicit or explicit, offering the highest value for the scarce transmission capacity in a given time frame shall be successful. So that's a kind of legal bounding, I would say, where we have to implement our algorithm. And so it's not that easy that we can say, okay, we consider here other ideas, because we have this strict kind of regulations also. In the FCA regulation 2016, 1719, Article 3, there are options for forward capacity allocations, and here is written that TSOs shall promoting effective long-term cross-zonal trade with long-term cross-zonal hedging opportunities for the market participants. We heard today several times it's not very clear or very same understanding what is understood under hedging opportunities, because this is also not indeed not defined in the FCA. For me, important part of hedging is that market participants do have an assured price for trades they would like to do in the future. This means an important part of hedging, but hedging does not automatically mean that TSOs have to take all risks. This is probably a bit different understanding between hedging between TSOs and traders. So yes, then of course in this FCA regulation it is also written that the algorithm has to be non-discriminatory access for all market participants. It is and the treatment of all TSOs, agency and market participants has also to be non-discriminatory. And again, an interesting article to be considered in Article 28, there is written the allocation of forward capacity shall take place in a way which uses a marginal price principle to generate results for each bidding zone border, direction of utilization and market time unit. This gives, that's a very clear regulation if we are on the NTC side, where we have a merit order list, and then we start to allocate beginning from the highest bids down to the lower ones. In flow-based allocation, of course, it's not directly compatible, but it's a quite similar system that we have, that we shall use here also a marginal price principle for flow-based allocation. So electricity regulation stipulates this principle to use for the capacity allocation. However, FCA regulation does not exactly define what is to be understood as hedging. So this is a legal background we have to operate in. The next slide. So this is a bit how currently the long-term flow-based implementation shall be implemented. We also said in the last call that with the long-term flow-based implementation, there will be no longer explicit auctions on individual bidding zone borders, but there is one global allocation for all bidding zone borders together with a global optimum is built, it is not an optimum of congestion income. This is very important to say. Even it was said today, it's also not the goal to maximize congestion income, it's the goal to maximize welfare. Yes, the long-term flow-based allocation is allocated on regional level, and all bidding zone borders compete for it to ensure non-discrimination between the bidding zone borders. The same approach for their bids valuation shall be applied on the whole CCR. And then what we also said today, the price of a bid represents a market participant's willingness and commitment to pay on an LTTR. In other words, how much the market participant values these LTTRs. And this value can be caused either by volatility or by a low availability of capacity, or considering the forward prices, which are also made and defined by the market participants. These forward prices are also not made by TSOs or any allocation entity. And therefore, such prices shall give a signal to evaluate congestion in the grid. That is where the congestion is valued the most by the market. So high market spread is also a signal for urgent need of additional cross-border interconnectors. So this and finally, so for TSOs, the currently proposed flow-based allocation is a fair and is non-discriminatory approach, which considers all the bidding zone borders and bids at one time of the market participants in the same way. So shall we? Now the next slide, I think, there we will start an example which shall be presented by Michael. How to understand and explain a bit how flow-based market coupling shall work or is working and operating. So the question is, do we make a short question round, or I see hands raised, or do we proceed with, shall we proceed now with these examples?
Zoran, this question would be for you probably.
Yeah, I said please proceed in the interest of time.
Okay.
Then we will have questions.
So probably one more click would be needed in order to show the full content of the slide, please. Okay, thank you. I'm here to support Harald and TSOs when it comes to design and optimization issues. So we'll start with the example which aims at internalizing the idea of flow-based allocation and what are the motivations for this way of thinking. So in order to bring you this message, we'll try to use the example of a manufacturer who would try to optimize its production of chairs and couches. And what we have here is a set of data which he has in his disposition. But first of all, let me finish with the context, because context here is very crucial. So production of each of the items is related to utilization of some kind of materials. And we have wood, fabric, and steel. And for our example, we're using the production from recycled materials. So they are actually costless for us, but they are limited because we have limited space in the magazine, or the provision was just limited to some amounts. And what we can hear from this, what we can read from this example is that we would expect selling our chairs for 100 euros and selling couches for 1,000 euros. But on the other hand, we know that wood demands, for example, 8 kilograms of wood, half kilo of fabric, and only 100 grams of steel. And additional set of data can be provided for couch. In the last column of this input data, let's say for our exercise, we have the constraining numbers of our resources. So we have finite amount of wood, which amounts to 650 kilos and so on for fabric and steel. So the question is, what should we actually choose? What combination of chairs and couches should we operationalize in our manufacturer's practice in order to obtain the greatest expected income when it comes to selling the items? And Zoran, if you make one click more, we would be given the results. So actually the optimal solution is that we should produce more than 42 chairs and 5 couches. Of course, here we have some decimal numbers, but we won't discuss what it means to produce 5,17 of a couch. This is only an example to stimulate our imagination. And we can also see that the object and function value is 9,470 euro in this situation. This is a very interesting result because we can instantaneously ask some questions which would resemble when it comes to discussion about the LTTR. So for example, first question would be, why isn't it the most efficient way or allocation to just produce as much of more expensive product as possible? Well, here we have some evidence, because if we decide to go with the couches, which are as much as 1,000 euro per piece, then we would quickly analyze and see that we can produce only 8 of them, because we can see that when it comes to limiting resources, with 8 couches, we would fulfill all the assortment of steel. And in this situation, we would have the result of 8,000 euro income. And whereas in this situation, we can see that we can beat this result with a solution of more than 9,000. The second question could be that isn't it that if we have more expensive items and less expensive items, the whole capacity, manufacturer's capacity, would be directed to more expensive ones? And the answer again is no, because we can see that approaching the optimal solution, we are allowing chairs to go into the discussion and to be manufactured as well, because of optimal utilization of all the resources. And I guess that we have some supplementary data regarding the solution, if Zoran would give us one click more, because there is also right-hand side part of the picture, and within the optimal solution, we can also see what is the utilization factor, let's say, of particular resources, and we can see that wood and steel in this situation are being fully used, and we are using almost all fabric that we have, but actually there is some fabric left. And with this information, we have also additional set of data, which gives us marginal value of each of those resources. Those are so-called shadow prices. And those shadow prices represent something very important from the optimization point of view. They give us intuition how much more we can gain when it comes to whole optimization process if we increase a unit of a limited stuff by 1. So in this situation, if we had 1 kilogram of wood more, then we could increase our total gain by more than 8 euro. But if we had 1 kilogram of steel more, then we could have even 333,3
Michal, you are muted.
Okay, thank you.
Now
So,
you're okay.
Okay. How much time it was muted? Sorry.
Very shortly, 15 seconds.
Okay, thank you. So what I wanted to underline is that the last column and the shadow price idea gives us this very insightful information about the criticality of the resources and so also their evaluation at the optimal point of the solution. So the reason why we are discussing this example is that in its construction, it is very similar to the proposed design of the flow-based allocation optimization problem. And we discussed what it comes, what parameters and what interpretation we have obtained when it comes to optimal selection of furniture. But now we can go to flow-based allocation and build this comparison directly. So first of all, LTTRs, which are competing on action, they are like those chairs and couches. So those are the particular instruments which, let's say, compete between themselves about being produced or being purchased or being sold or being accepted in the auction. The other point here is that the total income from the auction is here analogy to the expected revenue from the production or the selling of the manufactured items. So the let's say objective function of the whole auction itself. Critical remark is that limited resources, which here are represented by wood, fabric, and steel, are critical network elements under contingency in the system. So our connects with the limited values set by RAMs, remaining availability margins, are our critical resources, which are limited, as I said, but they are not per se costly for us because we do not pay for a unit of transmission capability. Very important stuff is that magical PTDFs, which enter the discussion often when we are talking about flow-based, are here very analogous to our utilization factors. So in the table with the blue, navy blue rectangle, we have utilization factors which tell us how many kilograms or how much kilograms we are using of each resource in order to execute one piece of our manufactured items. And very similar structure of data is conveyed by PTDFs. They are in a slightly different paradigm of percentage of use of megawatt of transaction, but actually this is very similar piece of data. When it comes to allocated flow, so the flow which is the result of the whole process, we have something like the column with optimal utilization of the resources. So last but one column gives us this information, and this is already the result of optimization. And the very important stuff, which I already mentioned, is that evaluation of the, let's say, CNEX cruciality is conveyed by shadow prices, which also obtained this interpretation, which I gave before. So this example should build this analogy. We have discussed it briefly, and not each element of this slide is being thoroughly examined, let's say. But on the presentation that would be distributed with you, there is one additional last slide in the form of appendix, which gives you the detailed information of majority of the numbers over here with the interpretation and comments. So I guess that if you would like to come back and cross-reference this material, you're very invited. Before we go to the next slide, I suggest, okay, so Zoran, it is up to you whether we give the floor to the questions or not.
Maybe a fast question, and then I would like that you finish the presentation, and also Martin after you. Then we will have a full session until the end of the meeting for discussion. Yeah. So Jerome, I guess.
Yeah. Many thanks, Zoran. I'm still wondering. I was like looking at the presentation, I'm still wondering about the relevance of this example in the context of long-term allocation. A reminder again, we're talking about options. So those are forward rights. We're not talking about allocation of flows. I mean, despite the methodology being called flow-based, like we're not allocating flows in the forward, in the long-term time frame, in the forward time frame. So here, what would be really like, we're not comparing a chair that is worth €100 and an armchair, like an armchair that is worth €100 and a couch that is worth 1,000. But like what market participants are trading in the forward time frame and why they're interested in forward transmission rights, like is how the value of that chair evolves over time and how the value of that couch evolves over time and how those two compare. So that's really the concept of option, like how much, like deciding that a chair is worth 100 and a couch is worth 1,000 and decomposing the different elements of like the limitations and how those chairs and armchair and couches are constructed. I'm really wondering how this relates to long-term transmission rights, like fundamentally. So I'd be happy to understand more about that.
This is a very good question to begin this discussion with. I guess that the answer was partially given in the different, let's say, parts of the European discussion, because we are not really debating now the flow-based character of long-term LTTR allocation. It is already established and we are trying to execute it. So this question to some extent is to this previous discussion, but I'll try to answer as comprehensively as I can, and I hope that maybe the colleagues can support me. So first of all, we are talking about financial instrument. This is true, but those are financial instruments which have underlying structure of power exchange, and this power exchange is executed via the physical infrastructure, which actually is limited, and it gives the, let's say, the flavor of real constraints and the real world to this discussion. It can convince you or not, but there is an evidence which actually probably is the most convincing, is that the fact that the effects of long-term allocation have very direct influence into the capacity calculation for day-ahead frame, which is very physical and very, let's say, tangible and material. Yeah. So we are talking about trading the financial instruments, but the execution of this instrument has to be reserved in the terms of capacity, which influences very tangible day-ahead market. So this connection is already built in to market design and the interrelationships between those two timeframes, so long-term and day-ahead. And this is the reason why we are discussing this physical element of something which is very, let's say, etheric, like a financial instrument itself. Is it the step into the clear direction for you?
I mean, I see that in like maybe in the calculation aspect of things, where like the physical reality and the limitations that you will be like that TSOs are facing in the day ahead time frame, like are taken into account for sure. But like coming back to your example, like what I'm wondering is like you start from the price of an armchair and the price of a couch, and like that's not like, and the difference between those two prices, and that's not really like what we're after when we buy forward transmission rights. What we're after is like, okay, maybe like the armchair is 100 now, like I think in 2 months it will be 10, and maybe in a year it will be 2,000, and that's what we price. That's
this is
not
very interesting. This is very interesting thread, but we have to define what kind of problems we are solving now and what kind of problems are to be solved internally by market participants. I claim that the value of 1,000 or 100 is to be established internally in market participants' facilities. So I do not claim that it has any tangible or realistic interpretation. It can be very mysterious for any other market participant or non-market participant, and it can be visible and meaningful only for you. But you are to be a guy who gives a number which evaluates this transmission right. So let's say that the whole story about the volatility of prices and variability of prognosis is made beforehand, and this debate ends up with the conclusion how much this instrument is worth to me. And this information is being communicated to the auction, and this information is now represented in this example by 100 or 1,000.
Okay, if you can please continue with the rest of the presentation in the interest of time.
Sure, thank you. So let's go to the second slide. This is the last slide that I will be discussing for you. And it tries to wrap up the information that we have already discussed and show it in the light of the flow-based allocation again with a fresh breeze. I hope so. So first of all, we would like to use careful wording here because sometimes we are talking about the competition of borders, and actually I think that it is very healthy to discuss the competition of transactions or LTTR offers placed on particular borders between themselves, and they are competing. If they are competing for anything, they are competing for the resources. So for this domain, which is limited by CNECs, so critical network elements established in capacity calculation process. What is very important is question related to Jérôme's question. So interdependence between the transmission right as a financial instrument and its physical execution. And this physical execution actually reaches for those physical resources that are being limited and which actually constitute the constraint domain of our optimization exercise over here. In this situation, PTDFs, as I said, play a key role to actually determine how much of particular resource we are in need for while executing particular instrument. What can be stated over here is that not only price is the determining factor when it comes to acceptance of particular instruments. And we might say that if utilization of resources is very similar, surely the price could be the deciding factor. But if there is a quite big difference in utilization of resources, then price is only a partially deterministic thing. We can recall the example before and claim that if expected price was the only factor, then maximum number of couches would be produced, but it is not. And we can also see that there was some kind of discrepancy when it comes to utilization of steel. So for example, chairs are only 10 times cheaper than couches, but actually they use 15 times less steel. So they are more steel efficient, we might say, when it comes to the production, and steel is one of two critical resources over here. So paradoxically, we can see that cheaper chairs win the competition over couches when it comes to utilization of steel. And this is something very important, and this is important message to deliver and to stay with after this presentation, I guess. So as I said, high prices on one places. So in this situation, this is analog to couches doesn't make it impossible for the other border to actually have this potential to have also the bits accepted. And we might say with the last tire over here that if no capacity is being allocated on particular border, it means that it doesn't generate enough value and that it lost the competition with the other instruments, other LTTRs. We have something like a tangible example, I guess, on the right-hand side here of the slide. And we wanted to illustrate two very different LTTR offers, which are different in probably any possible aspect, but the combination of numbers make it to some extent comparable from the point of view of decision-making algorithm. And I would like to guide you briefly through this example, and this would be very end of this part. So first of all, let's say that we are comparing two products. On the left-hand side, we have only 1 megawatt offer valued 10 euro per megawatt. So its complete value would be 10 euro. And it has a 50% utilization of one particular CNEC. This is our information stored in this line, PTDF equal 50%. We have the other offer, which is greater when it comes to volume. It has 10 megawatts, but it's cheaper. It has only 1 euro per megawatt price. And its utilization of this particular CNEC, this particular resource, is only 5%. And we put this equilibrium mark between them because of two reasons. So first of all, we might say that from the point of view of optimizing algorithm, acceptance of any of these offers introduce the same increase of objective function. It would be 10 euro more when it comes to value of accepted offers. On the other hand, we might say that both offers utilize the same amount of critical resource. So if you have 1 megawatt left-hand side product, which has utilization factor of 50%, it would use half of the megawatt of the critical CNEC. On the other hand, the right-hand side product is as big as 10 megawatts, but it utilizes only 5%. Let's say 5% of this product would burden the particular CNEC. So the utilization of CNEC would be all in all the same, half of the megawatts. So we can see that different products with different configurations can be treated in a similar way. And I guess that it gives you the glimpse of how it actually would work and how the complexity of input data over here could determine the, let's say, favorable offers. In opinion of the TSOs, this is a fair construct, and let's say that we made a big effort to make it as transparent as possible. If we managed or not, this is to be shown in the later part of the process. Thank you.
Okay, let's go on.
Yes, here we have now finally 3 slides from ENTSO-E side where we explain why we had concerns with finding an alternative parameter for considering this kind of risk premium, because at the first workshop, market participant said, or trader said, we can use the forward market spread to calculate any kind of this risk premium there. Of course, TSOs were discussing this and considering this, if it would be possible and if this could be a good idea. And indeed, we would appreciate to have here some parameters, they would make sense. But on the other hand, we see also some problems with the proposed parameters. For instance, for the forward market spread, we see that here European markets or even the markets within one CCR are not that much harmonized that you can compare directly these forward market prices to each other. And then there is the problem how to use this not directly comparable forward market prices in one algorithm, because if you do this and if you consider them in the same way, you cannot make it different, then you have some uncertainty, respectively you have some discriminatory things related to some bidding zone borders because of different kind how forward market prices are built in. This is one of the problems. And the other problem here for using the forward market spread could be, of course, only that there is indeed, especially on bidding zone borders, which are not very liquid, there could be the problem that some major market traders can influence the prices and also the forward prices, because they make more or less based on their bidding strategy or yes, on their buying strategy, these kind of prices. And so a kind of influence, at least I wouldn't like to say manipulation, but influence to this parameter is possible from the market side. And this is also something we see as a risk if we use the forward market price. Then to the next slide, please. The next thing was that we could use the ex post day ahead prices to consider such a risk premium, especially this was in mind to consider the volatility. Here we have simply to say that the autoregression between past day-ahead price spread and forward product spread for a given border is not necessarily given. It could be, but it is not necessarily given. Because seasonal effects or fundamental data might change over time, and then this correlation is not really given and it is not valid. So also this parameter is at least questionable, I would say. So both presented options are not compatible with the legislation in principle, because legislation is speaking of not considering such things. They are not compatible with the implementations in the given timeline for our understanding. And one also important point we didn't raise and mention today is that if we consider here this kind of risk premium based on modification of the allocation algorithm, this would mean to have a different matching algorithm for the day ahead and the long-term flow-based allocations. The next slide, because I have an eye to the time, is more or less given the same arguments on one slide again. Advantages and disadvantages we clearly see from TSO side. Unfortunate, I say, that according to the expectations of the market participants, that the approach as we understood it does not fulfill the inclusion of the risk premium. It was the parameters we found so far problematic for our understanding to be used, and on the other side we have a quite well tested methodology within the past years, also from the day ahead process, and now we try to make the next step and go with this methodology more or less to the long-term allocation. I would say then this is more or less maybe the last slide. This is again given the final position of the TSOs, where of course TSOs welcome any solutions that market participants may want to bring forward and to propose to assess the feasibility of its implementation in the future within the legal framework. But it's, as I said, related to the parameters we discussed above, this would be problematic, and so TSO call market participants to further discuss improvements to the allocation algorithm once it has been implemented. Unfortunate, I have to say, but from the TSO's perspective, we have definitely clear regulations which are binding us very strong, and which makes it very complex for us also to use parameters which do not assure that there is fair and fair situation for all traders and market participants in the same way. So this I try to bring the slides quite fast so that we can finally also go to the slides prepared by ACER.
Yes, thanks, Harald, and Michael for efficient slides. Then I would now hand over to Martin, and then to use the rest of the time. It's not much for remaining discussion. So Martin, please.
Thank you, Zoran. So I'll try to be quick. So I only have 3 slides. A couple of reflections from ACER side. Just to point out at the beginning that we are open for discussion. We have some concerns, but we do expect the discussion will continue because these are all very interesting questions. What we would like to emphasize is that what we understand, the EFSA regulation has 2 main objectives, not just one. So it's to promote effective cross-zonal, long-term cross-zonal trade and to provide sufficient hedging opportunities. So those 2 objectives are, both of them are important, and they largely overlap. You know, if you do cross-zonal long-term trade, you hedge, and if you hedge, you know, you also trade, and so they are 2 sides of the same coin. But in terms of objectives, they are both important. What we would see that is, if hedging would be the only objective, so only to hedge the price variations, then the proposal from the market participants would make a lot of sense. So it would indeed, you know, be a valid way forward. But we have the other objective is to facilitate cross-zonal trade, which means that in the long-term time frame, the demand can find the cheapest supply. So, you know, if you have a generator in Germany that can offer, let's say, electricity at a very low price, of course, this generator is interested to sell this electricity to the bidding zone or to neighboring areas, which offer them the biggest price, and long-term capacity allocation does enable that. That's an important objective that, you know, was emphasized before, but I want to emphasize again where that it's important. If you can go to the next slide, Zoran. So a small example of this, you would say, arbitrage between two bidding zone, so 2 bidding zone borders. So in this example we have expected prices and we have futures prices. So let's say the risk premium is the same in all bidding zones, and let's assume also that the cross-zonal risk premium is the same. And you know, if we would look only at the volatility and hedging, we would allocate 500 megawatts to each of these borders, so 50-50 based on risk premium. However, you know, by doing that, what do we achieve? So we because, you know, when you when you allocate transmission rights, you also impact futures market, you impact supply demand, long-term supply demand in each bidding zone. So, and what you would see is that the future price in B will decrease and future price in C will increase. And why is this the case? Because the expected spot prices, are always based on what you expect to happen in the day-ahead time frame. In the day-ahead time frame, you would expect the full 1,000 megawatt would be allocated to bidding zone from A to C, because this has the much larger price spread. So expected spot prices are based on expected capacity allocation in the day-ahead time frame. But if you allocate long-term capacities in a different way, you distort long-term signals by assuming that more capacity will be available from A to B, but in fact it will not be, because everything will be allocated from A to C in the day ahead. So what will this result in is that the supply for futures or demand, you can look at it both ways. So if you allocate 500 megawatts from A to B, you increase the supply for futures in zone B by 500 megawatts, or you reduce the demand for futures in zone B by 500 megawatts, because those 500 megawatt transmission right would impact the supply and demand, long-term supply and demand in zone B and A as well. But this makes two market forces. One market force is that, of course, the FTR will still be compensated at the expected at the price spread at delivery. So that's a normal market force that we see. But on the other hand, and this remuneration will be based on expected day-ahead market result. But on the other hand, what we see in the allocation of transmission rights is that we would see that the price will reflect as if 500 megawatt would be allocated from A to B, which in fact it will not be allocated. I think this distortion of allocation between the long term and short term is already to some degree present today, because in today we have NTC allocation in the long term and flow-based allocation in the day ahead, and those two signals are not matching, and they create they at the end they sort of balance out, but it's still the best way that you have the same allocation principles in the ahead and in the long term. And finally, the next slide, Zoran. So what we see, these are very good questions that we have discussed today. So how to ensure the most efficient cross-border trade and most efficient hedging opportunities. These are important issues. Also, how to ensure that demand meets the cheapest supply. That's important element. So long-term market should facilitate long-term cross-zonal trade. The proposal by which you would somehow separate risk premium from expected spot price is nice in theory, but in practice we would have many questions. So, as you know, risk premium is a theoretical concept that works well in theory, but when you try to measure it, it's very, very, very complex problem, because it depends on each individual market. So it doesn't depend only on the volatility. Volatility can be assessed with certain mathematical measures, but it also depends on the risk, how each participant is risk averse. So how prone is it to risk? And then when you aggregate different participants' willingness to hedge, then you get to the risk premium. And to measure this, there were many attempts in the past, but none of them came much close to the theory. So what we would emphasize is that, to ask maybe also stakeholders, is there any basis in academic literature? Is there any basis in practice by which something like that was proposed, was theoretically sort of laid down as the best way to go? Is it implemented somewhere around the world so far in transmission rights? And also, the legal framework is also, is it enough or it's not enough? What's also important, I emphasize consistency between the long-term and day-ahead price signals. So having different allocation algorithms does create, I would maybe not say distortions, but tensions. So one market force is based on expected day-ahead outcome, and the other market force is the long-term trade, so the allocation of transmission rights. And if those two are not based on the same principles, you have those forces pushing away instead of towards each other. So to summarize, we do have some concerns, but we are open to continue the discussion on this element.
Thanks, Martin. We don't have too much time. Luckily, we had quite a lot of discussion in the meantime. Jérôme, please.
Many thanks, Zoran and Martin. So I'm just gonna try to concentrate on this last slide and be quick. So like the first question and your whole consideration about like cross-zonal hedging, but also cross-zonal trade. Like as you said, they're linked. And as Eden mentioned, if we had like no volatility at all, like there's no cross-zonal trades. Like again, like taking the example that we showed back in January between like if you take forward financial markets with which we can really compare what LTTRs are for like us as traders and market participants in general, like there's no forward market trading between the CFA franc and the euro because those currencies don't move with regard to each other. That doesn't mean that there's no spot trading between those two currencies because you need to exchange currency. But like there's no need to hedge a potential risk of variation between those two things, those two currencies. So it's a little bit the same for long-term transmission rights. If you have no movements between two markets, despite them being a significant market spread between the two, you will have trades in the day ahead because that's where you want to make flows move. You will not have forward trading. So I'm a bit hesitant about like trying to differentiate between cross-zonal trade and cross-zonal hedging because like cross-zonal trade is a factor of the need to hedge. Now on your second question, ensuring that demand meets the cheapest supply. Once again, here we're talking spot trading. We're not talking forward trading. We're not exchanging flows. Like despite this methodology being called flow-based long-term methodology, we're not allocating flows in the forward time frame. So that's really an important distinction, and that's maybe the problem with the basis of using that methodology or calling it flow-based allocation, where we're not actually allocating flows in the long-term time frame. Now, to your question 3 and 4, that's the discussion we want to have for sure. This will take a long time, and that's really why we wanted to make sure that this discussion is not closed while the algorithm developments are going on, and that's why we're requesting to have this kind of like placeholder in the formulation of the algorithm. There's no I don't think there's academic literature to support for the moment what we want to do. Also for the simple fact that it's the first time that flow-based methodology want to be there to allocate in the long-term time frame. So those are things we need to discuss collectively, and this is not going to be easy, and this may take a long time, but we want to make sure that there's an open door for it. And then again, and on your last question, consistency between long-term and day-ahead price signals, you're talking about those in the markets. So there will be correlation between the long-term price signal in zone A and the day-ahead price signal in zone B, and the long-term price signal in zone in zone A and in zone A, and the long-term price signal in zone B and its day-ahead price in zone B. The price of the transmission capacity between two zones is related once again to the expectations of those zones, of the spread between those zones being very volatile, rather than the intrinsic value of that spread in the day ahead itself. So so those would be general comments. It's super late already, but that would be main comments. Our only plea at the moment is really to make sure that it's we don't just continue the conversation I would say on theoretical terms, without a possibility to have a conclusion of that conversation that tells us, well, oh yeah, now we realize that's a great idea, but we can't do anything about it.
Thanks. It's very useful for us to consider this. Maybe just one additional question. So, indeed, you're right when there is full correlation between two markets. Even if there's price spread, if the prices are fully correlated, indeed there is no need to hedge. You don't need to have any hedging mechanism. That's the extreme, But you could also have other extreme where the expected price difference is 0, but there is a large risk premium. The question is, would you need to hedge in this case? Because the price, the average price is the same. So why would anybody want to expose or hedge this position? So
yeah. I mean, those two extreme examples are extreme examples, but indeed, and if you have a micro difference, you may not even care about hedging, except a micro difference over immense enormous capacities creates an absolute number that is high. But so we're talking rather about everything that stands in the middle and how to hedge this. So.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Martin Polkowski was actually the first one to comment. It's a brief comment from Martin, and then I would like to wrap up because we are.
Yeah, thank you. Just maybe one short question towards the Helen to Jerome. In fact, this concept is nothing new. This has been applied for already 15 years at the technical profiles, the Polish borders and the German 50 Hz Polish borders. So you have common constraint between more bidding zones, and in fact the flow base is just being more complex and have some PTDFs as well. But I don't remember that during the last decade any trader has complained about the way the allocation is done on these technical profiles. So my question is why since this did not harm traders for the last 15 years, why suddenly it's such a big problem?
I mean, if I remember well, we've commented in the past on the technical profiles at the Central European borders, rather because we don't necessarily always understand how they're determined. And here we're on the technical profiles, we're talking about how the TSOs are setting capacity kind of in a coordinated way based on TSO constraints. And that is linked to the fact that most of those rights until now were allocated as PTRs. We're moving towards an FTR world. We are also trying to not do necessarily, especially in the core region where you have a long-term allocation inclusion in the day-ahead time frame. So those constraints, those physical constraints will probably still be there because of the LTA patch. But it's a question of like taking into account like other optimization function, like elements in the optimization function, which are actually like those volatility aspects. I don't know if Hélène wants to complement.
No, I'm not a specialist about that, but do you talk about allocation of those profiles? Or only the calculation?
Yes, allocation. The calculation, we don't talk about the how much is allocated, but on the algorithm only. Which in fact, what we have been suggested as ENTSO-E is exactly the same for the, let's say, for the flow basis for this technical profile from the conceptual point of view. So that's the question, because on the capacity calculation, I can imagine that there has been many questions, but on the allocation itself, I don't remember that the usage of the algorithm to allocate the technical profiles has ever been contested.
To be honest, I don't know about those technical profile, and I don't think it's in the core region, right? And do we talk about FTR?
It is Polish borders, or Polish borders.
And do we talk about allocation of FTRs?
Yeah, we do have PTRs that use it or sell it, which is, we can say it's FTRs more or less as well. But I see that you don't have information on that, so let's continue with other questions at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I hope that that the meeting was not only interesting but also useful. We spent some more time than it was planned, but I believe that it was worthy. Briefly to wrap up, we saw the increased interests of market participants on results and participation in external parallel run on both calculation and allocation part, especially on the allocation results. And we saw that it would be necessary and expected to coordinate activities in core region and the Nordics region. Still, regarding the documents to be published for SAP, both market participants and ACER desire was to have a public consultation by TSOs. Due to the lack of time, it might be impossible. So the second best would be that that stable draft of SAP document is shared as soon as possible by the TSOs, and then public consultation would be organized by ACER in our, let's say, time frame for processing the document. Regarding the algorithm, obviously we will not stop here. We will continue discussing, and we mainly reflected the idea of including this volatility component as on a theoretical basis now. The TSOs should, I would expect, to provide further opinions on market participants' proposals on providing a placeholder in the methodology for some perspective future developments and future changes of methodology. And I believe that we might discuss this on the next workshop. That would be roughly from my side. If no other comments or proposals, then I would like to thank you all for a very constructive discussion and very long discussion this time, and looking forward to seeing you at the next workshop.
Thank you very much.
Thanks and
thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.